Hello and welcome to Women Techmakers. This is a series that we created for the Google Developer Live channel to highlight the extraordinary women in our industry who are making some of the amazing products that we all use today. We are lucky to have Kim Palese here with us. And so just quickly, at Google, I'm Vice President in Google X. I've been here for almost 10 years, worked on lots of different things, led new business development, did lots of acquisitions like Google Earth and Maps and Picasa, and love working on technology.
And I am Pavni Divanji. I'm one of the engineering directors on Google+, and I'm really happy to be here interviewing Kim, who I worked with a long time ago.
Yes. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's really, we're going to get into what your amazing things you do, but that's really an amazing, fun moment because Kim, you're the founding product manager for Java.
Right.
That's amazing. And you were in the Java team.
I was one of the engineers.
Okay, you guys have to tell us what was how did you tell us more?
Well, first of all, it's so great to see Pavni.
I know.
It's actually been 15 years or so, so here we are reunited. It was an amazing, extraordinary experience to be on the Java team. It was a very intense experience. We had some near-death experiences along the way to getting Java out to the world, but it was incredibly rewarding because of the people on that team, the most extraordinary engineers, developers, technologists that I've ever worked with.
Kim, you have to tell us the story of how it was all born and how Oak became Java.
Yes, it's actually an amazing story. A small team of some of Sun's best software engineers wanted to build a software system of the future, for a networked world which didn't yet exist. And Steve Jobs was actually trying to recruit them away to come to Next to do that. And basically Scott McNealy, Bill Joy, and a handful of Sun's executives, founders, said, stay, build it here, and actually spun off a separate company called First Person to create this software environment for this networked world that didn't yet exist. And I came on as the product manager at this point. So there was a technology, but not yet a way to bring it out to the world. And we made multiple attempts at doing that.
And there were several misfires.
Exactly. the Newton, which was the state of the art when it came to mobile devices, Apple's first attempt at the smartphone or smart device. There was the set-top box market. This was the early interactive TV trials. Set-top boxes were actually SGI boxes that cost about $20,000 a piece. So none of this was ready for prime time. And we were, really struggling, trying to figure out how to get this incredible, extraordinary software out to the world and make it ubiquitous, which was the goal. It was ubiquity or go home. And right at this critical moment, when it looked like we were really failing at this, Mosaic came along. And so we realized we could create the world's first interactive browser and actually bring interactivity and applications, applets, into browsers versus just text, static text. And so that really opened the floodgates to getting developers to use this technology. We renamed it Java from Oak, and then everything changed in one day. In March 23, 1995.
How did you convince? I know you were one of the key people who convinced that we should put out Java free and not bother to have any constraints on it, because this is I think developers would like to hear what prompted that decision, what drove that decision. That was a key movement.
Yes.
And it was when things like that didn't happen.
Yes, that's true.
That's a very normal thing now. People are free, and then there's some freemium, and there's some other way that money comes.
Yes.
But that's a really extraordinary
giving it away
decision.
free, publishing the full spec, everything open. I really, the fact that Bill Joy was involved and was really part of this from the beginning was critical because Bill really understood the importance, obviously, with his background in bringing Unix to the world, the importance of open systems and open software. And so he, along with the core members of the team, went to Scott, and it really didn't take a lot of convincing to get them to say yes, because they understood. Sun came from that background. Right. And the network is the computer, open systems, Unix, so it was philosophically aligned with Sun's roots. But again, I really give a lot of credit to Scott McNealy, Bill Joy, Andy Bechtolsheim, the core founders of Sun, who shepherded this project along, even when things looked bleak, and then took a risk and let us give it away to the world.
I think this might be a good lead to talk to you a little bit about your journey and what kind of prompted. I was amazed when I learned that you're here. You are Java's really successful. You know, you are at the top of the hill, and then you decide to kind of throw it all away and do a startup. and
so I'm out there. So she's ready for her next thing.
I'm like, what kind of thought process you went to? What was your journey like in terms of entering the Marimba world?
It was actually a very exciting moment. It was sort of the birth of the internet as we know it today, the commercial internet. Netscape Mosaic Communications, it was called at the time, had just been founded. And we had just released Java. And I started talking with a few of my colleagues on the Java team, specifically Arthur Van Hoff, Sammy Shio, and Jonathan Payne, three of the most extraordinary software engineers on the planet. And we started thinking about what we could bring to the internet now. How could we take Java to the next level and actually enable businesses to build enterprise class applications on this platform? So more than just applets and browsers. And we realized we could build a whole software system to enable applications to be remotely distributed, updated, managed, and that was really radical stuff, to go outside the firewall and do that in a disconnected use environment. This is all very new. So we got excited about basically taking Java to the next level. It was also the fact that I would have the opportunity to work with these three engineers who, when you get the chance to work with extraordinary people, and then on top of that, to found and build a company, I wanted to learn. I wanted to learn how to do that. I wanted to, just sort of go out there, and even if we crashed and burned, we would learn a lot, and I realized I couldn't learn that anywhere else other than just doing it. So it was kind of the combination of all those things happening that made it a no-brainer ultimately. It was hard to leave Sun because I loved Sun. I worked at Sun for 7 years. I was so excited about Java kind of becoming now a key direction for Sun and really shaping a lot of the strategy going forward. But this was such a unique opportunity, and these three co-founders were extraordinary.
It's an interesting thing. Sometimes people talk about, like when's the time to leave, per se, and transition to do things. And I think one of the best things is when you're pulled.
That's true.
Not feeling
right.
pushed, like, maybe if you're in a bad environment, you need to go. But it's really like being drawn with your passion into the next things. Or Eric Schmidt always says, life is who you travel with. So your point about the colleagues that you had loved working with that were so extraordinary, and being able to go forward with them into the next adventure, which was actually building on the adventure before, is a great
Exactly.
thing.
Yeah. I find that I think Eric's quote is right on. It's about who you travel with.
So Marimba is right in the middle, of the beginning of the web.
Right.
Right? So I don't know. I was running Planet Out at that time, so it was an extraordinary time. Like, everybody knew each other, and it was just like the whole thing was, going crazy. Maybe it was an echo chamber, maybe not, but it was people were on fire with it. Really passionate about what was happening early. What year was Marimba?
January 1996, we founded the company.
Okay, because in 96 and 97, even into 98, people were building and things were starting, but it still wasn't like raw. Like 99 is like the Prince song. It was like this crazy year.
It reached its
I actually know
peak
somebody
of
who took a
madness.
photograph of every person she met that year, and it's like got to be the story of like all these crazy companies that existed.
Yes.
And, parties, and there was so much money because the VCs were in big. And
Exactly. We went from being kind of this backwater of geeks here in the valley to suddenly being,
Whoa,
the
on
new
the covers.
Hollywood.
Right.
It was weird.
And then we sort of went off a cliff.
Yeah.
But then
And I think Marimba was one. I remember, like, it was like the darling of the press, right?
Yeah.
And in that 2-3 year period.
Yeah, there weren't a lot of startups at the time, and
Yeah.
here we were 4 people coming out of the Java team. Woman CEO. Okay, so that was another element to it. So, yeah, the few companies that were out there got a lot of attention, and we did too.
And tell us a little bit about your personal journey, like jumping off this, being on the product management train to then taking on CEO and taking the company from like nothing to a public company.
Yes, actually, being a product manager was a fabulous background to becoming a founder and CEO, because as a product manager, you have the total scope of responsibility
Right.
for taking this lump of technology and making it a success in the market.
At Google, we sometimes think of it as mini CEOs. That's funny
That's
you
exactly
said that.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. So my time at Sun was the foundation for sort of learning on the job to become a CEO. And Sun was kind of a sink or swim environment, as you know. So
Yes, I do.
you had to figure stuff out on your own, and that's what you have to do as a CEO. So the other part of this was it was important to me to have the support of my co-founders in being the CEO and know that I was the right CEO for that point in the company, and that I could mature along as the company grew. And so I always sort of kept in mind how I was maturing as the company grew as well. Am I still the right CEO for the company? And I think that's an important thing any founder should do.
That's a really interesting. So I was talking with my friend Mary Lou Jepson recently, and when we were actually, this is when we were all we go to this great thing called Silicon Valley Goes the UK, which Kim and I go to, where we're talking to entrepreneurs. And Mary Lou drew this triangle. Just kind of like, I'm going to be hard on camera. I don't know if you guys can see it, but a small triangle. She said, I think it was maybe the CEO of Adobe who told her this. When we're in, she actually drew it up here. She said, when you're in a startup, you start small. And then as you imagine that it's going to grow like this, and so the people who start the company are somehow in charge of everybody forever,
Right.
you know? But you said it's not like, that's not what happens. What happens is the startup people are the startup people. And actually, if you think of it more like, this is kind of a messy drawing, but here's the triangle here, this is the starting group, and then the company grows out.
Right.
And some of the team is qualified or wants to go up, like say at Amazon, Jeff Bezos stays in CEO,
Right.
Or Larry Sergey go up. Different people, some people don't. And some people actually love the beginning and they go to the next thing.
Right.
So it's sort of very interesting. So as you were saying, like, here you felt like, okay, I'm qualified to get to the beginning, but then, am I learning enough to stay in this leadership seat and keep doing that? And having also the trust of your teammates to learn as you guys go.
Exactly. And what I also realized along the way is, most CEOs have to do it. Everyone has to be a first-time CEO, right? Yeah. So everyone is figuring it out really as they go along. And that was that confidence thing was a really important breakthrough for me, realizing, wow, I can do this. Everyone else is figuring it out as they go too. So Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and everybody.
It would be great if you talk a little bit about the challenging or the do or die moments through this journey.
Yes.
Like I'm sure there were a bunch of them.
Yeah.
Like in the very early days, like you have some funding, but like you got to make payroll,
right.
those kinds of things. But also like getting out there and getting public and some of the challenges of that. And then you guys eventually were acquired,
yeah.
Right? And so did some of those phases, and then it continued to grow within.
Right. Right. Yeah. So early days, we actually were getting a lot of immediate offers for funding, for venture funding. We were getting calls from VCs because we were so high profile coming out of the Java team, and it was sort of all this excitement about these startups. We didn't want to take funding. Actually, we wanted to build a product and get some users, and then, once we had something we felt confident we could take to market, then go out and start to talk to investors. And that turned out to be a really good thing for a variety of reasons. For focus, for 9 months, the four of us were in this little tiny space that we rented, and my three co-founders were cranking away, and I was building the business plan and figuring out how to take this technology, make it into a product. And those 9 months were so valuable because we built a really strong product that today is still the foundation of this product line at BMC, which was the acquirer. Amazing. My three co-founders built an amazing product during that time. And as we know, the smaller the team, oftentimes the better the code and the product. And we also were able to focus on getting user feedback, so we did that. And then once we went out and got funding, of course, we built value. So we were able to retain more equity in the company as the four co-founders. So that then we were able to go out and talk to the venture community, and Kleiner Perkins funded the company. We were part of the Java Fund, and we had great investors in them. So we had a wonderful launching. And then we were into the madness of kind of the whole internet craze. And one thing that I found challenging was realizing that what the outside world perceives you do or are is not necessarily true. In other words, you can't control oftentimes perception.
Right.
Because here we were this enterprise software company, and the outside world wanted us to be a .com consumer company.
Right. That's the stuff that's like on the cover of.
Exactly. That's the sexy stuff. So there was this thing called
Fortune.
Push. There was a company called PointCast,
Yes.
which was doing something pretty revolutionary, which was sending basically broadcasts of content like sports scores, weather, that kind of thing to your screensaver. And this was on all the screensavers of all the CEOs all over the valley, and everyone's trying to figure out what this thing was. Well, we kind of got lumped into, oh, you must be a push company. Right. So, but we were very different. We were selling to, Fortune 1000, Fortune 500 companies who wanted to deploy enterprise class applications across the internet. So that became really challenging, and I finally realized at a certain point, I can't control this. All we can do is really execute. We've built a great product. We have a great team. We just have to build and scale this thing, and eventually people will realize what we do. And that took longer than I thought. That realizing part, the building part, didn't actually take longer than I thought. It happened a lot faster because there was so much demand from business for this software to run an internet set of applications.
Did you have challenges when you tried to take what Marimba had produced and try to sell it in this traditional enterprise? How did they look at you as a woman CEO coming in from the valley?
Yeah, I never thought about that. You know how it is? You just don't think about the fact that you're a woman. You're just doing your job. One thing that actually worked very well is I hired the West Coast regional sales manager for Tivoli. Tivoli was an IBM company that basically was kind of the last century version or last generation systems management software. We were next generation systems management software, and so he knew how to sell against our competitors who were the incumbents. And so that allowed us to get off the ground. We went from 0 to 10 million in the first year and kept doubling revenue year over year. Right. So we ended up burning very little cash, ultimately using very little of the money we raised because we were already successful out of the gate because there was a market that we could sell into as the next generation software. So it actually worked very well. It's just the outside world perceived that we were this consumer company. And then there was this whole myth that developed around, well, they were a consumer company, but they failed at that. So then they had to totally regroup and start all over again, which is fine. It sort of doesn't matter what the world thinks as long as you know that you're building something of quality and people are getting value out of it, and our customers were.
Mm-hmm. So a bunch of different directions. So I don't know, like maybe we should jump into sort of at that same time you started to get very active, or the Valley. It's like you sort of tracked with sort of as the internet came, here to Silicon Valley. We started to engage with Washington.
Yes.
We started to understand that, technology policy was really important, and a lot of it wasn't being informed by sort of the industry creators. And you were one of the champions of doing that. So can you talk a little bit about those days at the time, and what were the few issues that kind of woke us up?
Yes, absolutely. I got a call from John Doerr in 96, early 96. Do you want to go to Washington to meet with Al Gore? And this was right at the beginning of the Valley's engagement, as you're saying, in the political process. What really tipped it off, sort of instigated that engagement in the mid-90s, was securities litigation. There was a lot of basically frivolous lawsuit filings going on. Basically every company in the Valley was being hit by these lawsuits. And so we realized we have to be at the table. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu, and that's basically what was happening. And so, but there was a much broader set of issues beyond securities litigation. So that included, getting broadband network deployed, figuring out encryption, policy around encryption, ultimately later privacy, and it's not always fun, engaging in the sort of down and dirty political process of negotiating
but it's necessary
and compromising, but it's necessary. And it's actually really interesting stuff when you get to the policy side, because you can craft policies that really drive growth, economic growth.
Right.
And policymakers, senators, members of Congress, have 1,000 different issues they're dealing with, and they don't always know stuff you assume they know. Right. So you have to be there having that conversation, and it takes continual presence and engagement, and I actually have grown to love it.
So, and you've done a fair amount now. So you guys went out and you met with Gore, with Vice President Gore at the time, and then was Technet existing yet, or was that
really at the founding kind of moment in the mid-90s? John Chambers, John Doerr, small group got it off the ground.
Right, yeah. They're still going strong with
very much, yeah.
And are you still involved with them?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I'm on the executive council, and it's a unique organization in that it's direct CEO engagement. A lot of policy organizations or advocacy organizations are, government affairs folks who are critical as part of the process, but not CEOs.
Okay.
And this organization is very much the CEOs engaged in the conversation at the table.
Very cool. I think we have a screenshot of Technet. Yes, no, maybe. We just kind of show quickly just so people see it. But
this whole SOPA PIPA, for example,
was one of the most recent issues. But
yeah.
I think it's so important to not only have the conversation, but also have an organization like Technet where we can be a resource to policymakers.
Right, exactly.
And available to them.
And bipartisan, nonpartisan. The point is to move the conversation along and figure out solutions rather than getting stuck in these polarized political dogfights.
Right. Thanks for your work there.
Happy to serve.
We need you.
Do you want to, maybe we can talk a little bit more on Marimba and how you kind of maneuvered the public waters and how the company got acquired? I think a lot of entrepreneurs in the audience or who are viewing would like to know, like, when do you make the decision? Right?
Yes.
Yeah, and also
you keep going, or
right.
do you just say, that's it, now it's the price is right or the time is right?
Right. And also an interesting thing, like, having worked on lots of acquisitions at Google, we have our incredible engineers like Pavdi and others have invented a lot of stuff here, but actually probably if you look at our portfolio of products, I don't know if it's half, but a very large number of them, a very large number are made by people who invented them here, including, Larry and Sergey in the beginning with search and then ads. And then a lot of stuff through incredible acquisitions where teams came in and then built from there. And it was really great to hear that BMC is, going forward. So there's sort of like the point of like, we're building this thing, but is it actually better leverage at some point to jump in with someone else and then build even bigger? I think in some ways the Keyhole team always talks about that with Google Earth, like what we're able to achieve together was something that neither of us would have been able to do apart.
Right. Yeah, it's always a difficult decision, about that whether and when to sell. For us, we were from the beginning a successful enterprise software company. We were able to get to profitability actually shortly after we went public, which was quite unusual at the time.
Which is super incredibly unusual at the time. People would say, we're a pre-revenue company. Right. And you're like, well, what's your revenue plan? They're like, well, I don't know, we'll figure it out later.
We were doing around $50 million in revenue at the time.
Wow.
And basically the bubble burst. And there was this very weird period, which now I've lived through several cycles, but at this time it was basically a lot of Sandhill Road, frankly. Sort of conventional wisdom was saying enterprise software is dead, search is dead, advertising is dead. It was, everyone went mad.
I used to joke that they were saying this is dead, but they were doing it on email. They were like, exactly. The internet's dead. We're all like quickly, surfing around and doing things. So
it was incredible.
It was that we were sort of way out ahead of ourselves in a lot of ways. But actually, what's so interesting, having been in those moments, is they play out at some point.
Right.
Maybe in a different form, but many of the ideas happen.
Exactly. So the entrepreneurs and the founders and the developers, of course, weren't paying attention to all of those pronouncements. They were just getting down to the work of building software and continuing to build the company, which is what we were doing. So we had a lot of customers who were really depending on the software for a lot of their foundational internet business apps. So we didn't really miss a beat. What happened was the world around us went crazy, and our stock price plummeted. And at one point the stock was worth less than the cash we had in the bank. We had $60 million in the bank, and the stock was worth like $42 million, and we had no debt. So that was how crazy things had gone. But basically, we hung in there, and that's a lesson that I have learned again and again, is persistence, not giving up.
Right.
Even when everyone around you is saying you're crazy.
I think it's a necessary gene for entrepreneurs.
Absolutely.
Otherwise you do not survive.
Yes.
And courage.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like somebody announces something that's exactly what you're doing, and you're like, oh no, but then, this time plays out and you go into competition. It's
right.
It's
right.
fine.
Things work out.
Staying at the table.
Yeah, as long as you're building something of value that the world needs, just keep doing it. And so that's what we kept doing. And so eventually the market recovered, our stock price recovered. We had started a relationship already with BMC, a partnership. Turned out that they were really a very good fit for us in terms of distribution channel, a way to get a lot more volume in the market. So the acquisition turned out very well, and I think for everybody. And in fact, there was a core team that remained, and in fact, several employees are still at BMC, as far as I know, one of whom became the CTO of BMC. So it ended up being a great acquisition, I think, for them.
In both directions.
Directions, yeah.
That's great.
So after that, I'm sure you had a choice, like having taken a company from nothing to a successful public company. So what made you kind of plunge into the startup world all over again? You wanted to do it all over again?
Yes. I guess I'm officially a serial entrepreneur. I confess I just love founding and building companies. I love being on a mission with smart people out to change the world. I mean, I think there's just nothing more exhilarating professionally or in life in general. And so this was SpikeSource was the next company I did. This is an open source company that was focused basically on helping businesses and people use open source software much more easily. So we were automating the management of open source stacks, application stacks. And the open source business was an interesting one. As a market, a challenging one, and particularly during the economic times ultimately that we all lived through. But we built was very powerful, and ultimately now we're seeing all around us this automation of open source software and stack management. We were a cloud company, of course, before people were talking about cloud and all of that, and this has been kind of a persistent theme for me. I started my career actually in artificial intelligence and expert system software back when that was hot, and then it sort of went through its cycles, and now of course AI is everywhere, but no one calls it AI. But we get excited about things, we get ahead of ourselves, but we just, we as entrepreneurs and founders keep building, and eventually the world needs it. And so that's what happened with SpikeSource. Cool. I just love that process. A lot
of the audience today is going to be developers primarily. Yeah. So maybe you can spend a little bit of time on your learnings around open source software and developer community, like your tenure at SpikeSource.
Yes. Well, one of the things that I just find so rewarding and exciting is the fact that open source has really unleashed this army of software developers globally. Yeah. And back when I was growing up in the software world at Sun, working for Eric Schmidt, actually, who was running a software product division at that time, software systems were closed, and it was very difficult to get access to software. It was expensive. And everything changed when the internet came along. And we've seen such an incredible explosion of creativity. And the developers are the ones that really made Java successful. They built the applets. It wasn't any kind of marketing campaign. There was no marketing campaign. It was the developers who did it. And it's the developers who are changing the world. And open source is really enabling that. So I'm thrilled as a software geek from way back to see what's happened.
Yeah, it's sort of the, like Wikipedia, the creativity, opens up. I was lucky to work with at General Magic really early on, and Andy Rubin was there, who's the Android lead, and we were working on, these little devices, but they were, this big. And one time the Motorola CEO sent us an actual brick in the mail because they were too big. But we were even before open source, so we thought that we needed alliance, very much in an 80s model, the way that Apple or Microsoft and developer communities. But it was much more controlled.
Very much.
And then, Andy, of course, went on to do Danger and Sidekick. And I think in that case, he also faced, these were getting smaller, but and Sidekick was awesome. but still the closed nature of the way that the carriers were treating the app store equivalent.
Right.
You know, like it was in their version, in their way. You had to talk to them. They would bless it. Maybe they would brand it. Much tighter controlled network side.
Right.
So even the devices were trying to open up. And so in some ways, I think, you know, Android is his, you know, third time to watch the movie, you know, and to act in the movie, and to drive that and sort of try. It's cool to see how open source in all forms and what he learned and what you learned and you know, came sort of full circle to really allow for the surface area of the world's creativity. You know, to act in concert.
Exactly.
With open standards. It's an amazing innovation. In a lot of ways, I think the 21st century is very much about openness.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's interesting with your government work, and that as we see government transparency come forward, or even lightweight things in the early 90s where open source comes, so does Truth and Reconciliation in South Africa as South Africa transitions, and this idea of openness and more.
Right.
It's an extraordinary thing.
It is. It's changing the world in amazingly profound ways, and what's great is being able to participate in that, you know, both in big companies and also startups. And the software developers are changing the world. I mean, that's basically the bottom line.
And they have to team up.
Geeks rule.
Let's talk about ClearStreet, because that's a real change idea. Which is incredibly exciting. And I think maybe born out of the ideas of you know, Occupy Wall Street and unfairness.
Right.
And how do we help people? You should say more about what your thinking is there.
Yeah, so I think everyone knows there's a huge problem with debt. And in fact, something like 43% of American households are 90 days away from being in poverty, from going off a cliff. People just don't have savings. And now the credit card debt, you know, is $1 trillion, and, you know, massive problem people are facing. And the solutions today, payday lenders, you know, just the kind of options that exist are really bad. So we started looking at the power of social. How could we use the power of people helping each other, both on the saving side and also on the buying everyday item side, to build assets and to get out of debt? And we started looking at something called rotational credit, which has existed for centuries, is very prevalent all over the world, particularly in immigrant communities or in underbanked communities where people don't have access to traditional banks. It's small groups of people agreeing to get together, say once a week or once a month, save a certain amount of money, and then once a week, if they're doing it on a weekly basis, one person goes home with all of the contributions from that week. And so it's a way of getting access to lump sums of cash, and the social contract that exists between people, kind of Weight Watchers style. You know, when people know they've got some, you know, pressure from their friends to follow through on their commitment, they do.
And Professor Eunice did some of that with microloans around each person taking a loan and having support from each other and a little pressure, a little peer pressure, to help you get through that. Yeah,
so it's that kind of foundational idea, and we're taking that, we're putting basically a social and mobile layer on that, so it's easy to start your own savings circle. And then we're accelerating it with merchant-funded rewards earned from everyday spending. So it's kind of this idea of loyalty, building merchant loyalty, and earning rewards, savings, which go directly into your savings circle. Earn $1 off that item, that dollar goes in your savings circle rather than disappearing in your pocket. So that's the basic idea. And it's based on stuff that's been proven to work. This idea of savings circle or rotational credit. Matched savings, so we're basically taking the merchant reward and creating essentially a form of matched savings. So that kind of acceleration of one's own savings habits. And then prize link savings is another thing that's been proven to work. People, if they know that there's an incentive, like to win an iPad or something like that, they will adopt good behavior or better behavior. For example, take a financial literacy quiz or adhere to a savings goal or what have you, based on an incentive like a prize, winning a prize. So we're taking these kind of concepts around behavioral economics that have actually been proven to work in practice and putting technology around it and creating a solution. The focus is on helping people get faster access to cash so they can pay off debts and then build long-term savings. And there's a whole movement across this country right now around asset building. And there's also a whole new generation of entrepreneurs who are building new kind of financial services companies that are about making profits and creating a success for financially, and also ensuring that people get ahead, financially, instead of getting further and further in debt.
It's fabulous, using our tools to help make a difference in this area, because it's like hitting everyone.
Right.
And maybe you can talk a little bit about what next for ClearStreet. Like, how are you planning to do internationally? Go international? You're just going to be focused locally?
So we're starting some small pilots locally here, but ultimately this is something that works globally, and it's a solution that's ubiquitously used today in an analog world, and so our goal is ultimately to have this be a global solution and product service.
They're giving us a signal. We've got a little bit more time. So I wanted to know about your dancing a little bit. You're an amazing dancer, and say a little bit.
I think a better way to ask the question is, how do you balance?
So I grew up dancing. I grew up here in the Bay Area, and I discovered ballet when I was 14, and I just never stopped dancing, and it's always kept me sane. What's great about dance, any form of dance, is that it takes total focus. You can't just zone out and run on a stationary, cycle a stationary bike. You have to actually be memorizing choreography. You have to be thinking about every movement, of your body and position of the arms and so forth. And it's also incredibly physically demanding. It kicks your butt. Right. And so that's been this wonderful, really literally balance in my life, and counterpoint to a very intense professional life. Right. And for me, what I've realized is that everyone needs something that they're passionate about, outside of what you do every day, especially if you're in a very intense work environment. And dance has been that for me.
And it's interesting because doing exercise and all sort of most of the tech companies have workout places, etc. But to think about that a little bit differently, as you have, which is take something that you've been passionate about as a young person, are exceptionally great at, because I know you're dancing, and to sort of keep that going, as a parallel track versus sort of the classic, let me go run on the treadmill, which is also good, but it's a really different way of approaching it.
Yes.
Just thought it was very interesting.
I have one kind of question in the same train of thought. What advice do you have for young women out there? I saw your Forbes rebuttal and loved it, bashing through the stereotypes and you standing up. I think everyone was watching.
Yeah.
So what kind of advice would you give to our young women developers who either entering tech or just entered tech?
Yeah. Go for it. You're better than you think you are, and the opportunities are just infinite. The opportunity to found a company, to build a company, to lead a project, to change the world. And we need more women technologists and women in general, women leaders doing that.
Kim and I were in England for the Silicon Valley Cup of the UK, and we were at Bletchley Park, which is we have these books, which is the amazing place where they crack the Enigma codes during World War II. And what was so interesting to learn about this extraordinary place and the work that was done, and really the founding of the modern computer industry was there. Alan Turing was there. Was that it was half women and half men, and such an amazingly diverse group.
Exactly.
And so we were lucky to meet some of the veterans.
Yes.
And they were totally passionate, women and men, in their 90s.
Yes.
Awesome.
It's so inspirational.
And I think sometimes people don't realize what the kinds of teams we're in. I think somebody's coding all alone or something, but it's really, the tech industry is amazing. We hope that more people, young men and young women, will join us.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you're right. I think people don't realize how social it is, the process of creating and building technology. It's very much about teams and interactions of teams, and the importance of diversity in really bringing all different views and approaches is so critical and often overlooked. And it's actually one of the things I love about Google is that you guys have really prioritized that from the beginning. And Bletchley Park is definitely worth a visit if you're ever in the UK.
45 minutes train ride from London. Last question, heroes.
Heroes. I would have to say my mom. I had an amazing mom. She grew up on a farm in Denmark. World War II, the Nazis occupied the farm. I mean, kind of a very interesting beginning. And she just decided to leave the farm, go travel the world. Never went back. She was the only one of her family not to. She had this attitude of she was so positive and very realistic about life, but also that perspective of never give up, persistence. Keep at it. And she did, and up against various obstacles along the way, and she never lost her positive attitude, and she was also an incredibly social person, very generous. Anyway, so I'd have to say my mom, hands down.
Awesome. Thanks, Kim, for being here.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thanks to everybody who joined us, and congrats on ClearStreet. I think it's really significant, and your amazing history. Thanks for sharing it with us.
Oh, thank you. It's really an honor to be here. Thank you both.
It's great to catch up.
Yes, exactly.
Java reunite.
Awesome.